Have you ever wondered if there's something in the Christian life, something simple, something already in our hands that could completely change your walk with God? Last week in my devotions, I came across a story in a book that I've just started reading on prayer, and it got me really excited. It made me realize or reminded me how God has put a divine key right in our hands, a key we talk about all the time, but rarely use to its full potential. Today, I want to read you this story because it shook something awake in me, and I think it may do the same for you. Alexander the Great was a mighty conqueror and king, and although he lived long before the time of Christ, his reputation still lives on today. As history tells us, he conquered all of the then known world. In fact, it is told that when he reached Asia, he realized there were no more countries to conquer, and he actually wept. Besides being a great conqueror, he was also a compassionate ruler. Every year, he set aside one day that he called Compassionate Day. As the story goes, on this special day of the year, he randomly selected different people across his kingdom whom he allowed to come and make special requests. They could ask for whatever they wanted or needed, and he would grant their requests. Most people asked for food, clothes, money for medicine, and so on. However, one year there was a man who dared to ask for more. Speaking through the king's spokesman, this man shared his request. Can you please tell the king that I want a large palace and I want. But before he could continue, the king's spokesman interrupted him with irritation. What impertinence! Don't you see all these people asking for food and medicine? How dare you to think that you can ask the king for a palace? But the man continued earnestly. I want the palace to include a large banquet hall where I can host a celebration because I have lots of friends, and I want the palace to be furnished, and I want a special meal prepared. But the spokesman stopped him once again, as he was getting more angry. I will not ask the king for this. This is the most outrageous thing I've ever heard. At this point, King Alexander saw the commotion. What does the man desire? He inquired of his spokesman. The spokesman reluctantly turned toward the king and came forward, whispering in low tones that only the king could hear. King, I'm afraid to tell you this. I can't believe how unreasonable this man is, and I know you will be upset. But he's asking for a palace. Not only does he have the audacity to ask for a palace, but he's asking that you'd make a large banquet hall in this palace, because he evidently has lots of friends. And he wants the whole thing to be fully furnished and supplied with food. I'm so sorry. I know this is such an unreasonable request. And I tried to get him to ask for something more reasonable, but he persisted. King Alexander paused for a moment. Then, with a large smile on his face, he turned toward the petitioner and enthusiastically replied, Request granted. The spokesman looked at the king in astonishment. How can you grant such an outrageous request? He asked in shock. The king replied, smiling. You see, all these people are asking for food, for medicine, and for mundane things. They ask that's, they think that's the only thing I can give, but they don't need a king to give them these things. Anyone with extra resources can do these things for them. But this man, he's the first man that's really made me feel like the king I am. For only I can grant such a request. Now I want you to listen to this. The Bible tells us, now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. Why do we so often settle for superficial blessings when we serve the King of the universe? Why do we settle for living life 3 inches below the waterline, barely surviving spiritually, when God is longing to give us so much more? So, I enjoyed this story because it reveals something about God that many of us forget. That God is a king, a real king, a generous king, a king who delights when we actually ask him for something that only a king can do. Most of us come to God the way these other people came to King Alexander, asking for what we think is reasonable, what seems practical, what feels safe. Could be simple things like, Lord, help me get through the week, give me strength, help me survive this situation. And there's nothing wrong with those prayers, don't get me wrong, but they're not the limit of what God can do. The Bible says that he can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. So why do we often ask so small? Why do we settle for spiritual crumbs when God is inviting us to a feast? Why do we tread water spiritually when the King of the universe is saying, ask me for something only I can give? What if we prayed with the boldness of someone who actually believes they're speaking to a king? What if we dared to ask for a deeper walk, not just enough strength to survive, but enough grace to grow? What if we asked for victory over sins we've quietly accepted as part of us? What if we asked for a living, breathing prayer life that actually changes things? What if we ask God to make us spiritual giants in a world that desperately needs people who know how to pray? Alexander loved that request because it made him feel like the king he truly was, like he said. And I wonder sometimes if we move the heart of God the same way when we dare to pray big, bold, humble, faithful prayers that only a king can answer. So, here's my challenge for you this week. Don't pray small prayers. Pray like you have a king. I want to challenge you to ask for something this week that only God can do in your life. It could be something that scares you a little, something that stretches your faith, something that requires a miracle and not just human effort. Because God is not intimidated by big requests, He is honored by them. And I truly believe that when we learn to pray like that, everything changes. This journey I'm on of rediscovering prayer again and just being reminded of the principles that God has given us in His Word, it's taken me back to lessons that God carved in my heart 6 years ago, seasons where I saw prayer move mountains and I saw God work in ways that have marked me forever. And clearly, I still need to be reminded because we tend to forget. I cannot wait to keep sharing what God is teaching me and to walk with you as prayer becomes something beautiful in your relationship with Him. Not just a duty, not just a discipline, but a delight. But for today, your challenge is simple. Ask big. Because you, my friend, have a king who loves when you come to him like he is one. Until next time, keep seeking, keep asking, because your king delights to hear your voice.